breathing nearby. You cannot hear footsteps. You cannot hear a door. Just the sound of air moving in a way that does not belong to you. It takes a few seconds to understand that the room is not empty anymore. That is usually how it begins. Not with violence, with confusion, with the sense that something has changed while you are not looking. You hold still because moving would confirm it. You listen longer than feels reasonable. The breathing does not rush. It does not panic. It waits. Whoever it belongs to has all the time in the world. On this channel, stories are told in a fully cinematic audio-first way, so you never have to look at the screen to feel every moment. You are listening to minutes of fear, where every story leaves something behind. The island was known for quiet routines, not silence exactly, more like predictability. Buses arriving when they were supposed to. Doors left unlocked without much thought. Neighbors who noticed when something felt off because so little ever did. People there measured danger by weather and tides, not by strangers. That illusion did not break all at once. It thinned, slowly, over years, in small, deniable moments that could be explained away if you wanted to keep sleeping at night. It started with stories that did not line up perfectly. A woman who came home shaken but alive, struggling to describe a voice that sounded wrong somehow. An accent that felt worn like a costume. A smell that lingered longer than memory should allow. Rope marks that doctors treated quietly. Questions that police wrote down and then rewrote later, hoping clarity would arrive if they stared long enough. It never did. People told themselves it was a one-time thing, then a coincidence, then bad luck. The attacks did not announce themselves. They repeated, always when someone was alone, always when help was just far enough away to matter. The pattern was not obvious at first. Only in hindsight did it feel deliberate, like someone testing the shape of fear, learning how far it could stretch before it snapped. Bus stops became places you hurried through instead of waited. Curtains stayed closed longer. Parents checked on sleeping children twice, then 3 times, then stood in doorways listening to breathing that felt too fragile to trust. What unsettled people most was not what happened. It was what did not. No witnesses who could agree on a face, no clear trail, just the same details resurfacing in different mouths. The rope, the voice, the smell, the sense that whoever it was knew exactly when to arrive and when to vanish. Years passed this way, long enough for children to grow taller, long enough for routines to change around an absence, long enough for fear to settle into the background like a low hum you stop noticing until it suddenly goes quiet. And then, instead of stopping, it moved closer. Homes were supposed to be the end of it. Walls, locks, familiar rooms. But one night, a child woke to a light that did not belong to the morning. Another family heard their phone ring with nothing on the other end. Somewhere else, a house went dark all at once, as if someone had practiced turning off the world. People began to understand something they had avoided admitting. This was not a man passing through. This was someone who lived among them. Someone who watched. Someone who waited. And someone who, for reasons that were never fully explained, believed the island belonged to him when the lights went out. It came with a long, heavy quiet. The kind that makes you sit in the dark and listen to your own breathing, wondering how much of it someone else can hear. Fear changed the way people listened. It was not just footsteps anymore. It was the pause between sounds, the space after a car passed, the moment when the house settled and made a noise it had always made, but suddenly felt suspicious. Police patrols increased, but reassurance did not. Uniforms passed by windows and left again. Questions were asked that circled the same small facts. Height, build, voice. Nothing solid enough to hold. Every answer created 2 more uncertainties. Some residents began keeping mental maps of light. Which roads were lit? Which lanes went dark too early? Which bus stops left you exposed for just a little too long? Mothers timed their evenings by the sound of keys at the door. Fathers stayed awake pretending to read while listening for anything that did not belong. And still, the figure kept slipping through. What unsettled investigators was not the repetition. It was the adjustment. When streets became watched, the threat shifted indoors. When adults stayed alert, children became targets. It was not rage, it was selection. Someone was learning. There were moments when it almost ended. Close calls that people later replayed endlessly in their minds. A scream that came fast enough. A struggle that lasted seconds longer than expected. A light turned on at the exact wrong time. In those moments, the presence vanished without sound. No chase, no confrontation. Just absence again, as if nothing had ever been there. The description stayed frustratingly consistent and useless. Middle-aged, average, a coat meant to blend into bad weather, gloves that erased fingerprints before anyone thought to look for them, a smell that did not belong to soap or smoke or sweat. Something older, something closed in. The voice stayed with survivors the longest. Not loud, not frantic, controlled, almost conversational. Sometimes kind enough to confuse, sometimes flat enough to make threats sound like statements of fact. The accent never stayed the same. It drifted. It slipped. As if the speaker enjoyed knowing it would be remembered wrong. Rumors filled the gaps the police could not. People whispered about recluses, about men who walked too late and watched too closely. One name surfaced more than others, not because of evidence, but because fear prefers something it can point at. That choice ruined a life. A quiet man became a symbol. His habits were suspicious only because people needed them to be. He walked alone. He owned the wrong kind of coat. He did not explain himself well. When his home burned, it did not stop the attacks. It only proved how desperate everyone had become. For a while, the island pretended the fire had worked. Months passed without incident. People breathed again, cautiously. Then something happened that made the fear sharper than before. A letter arrived. It was not angry. It was not rushed. It was written by someone who enjoyed being understood. Someone who believed patience was a form of power. The words promised nothing specific, only continuation. A reminder that stopping had never been part of the plan. After that, silence became threatening. Every quiet night felt intentional. Every peaceful week felt borrowed. When nothing happened, people did not relax. They waited for correction. Because deep down, everyone understood something they did not say out loud. Whatever this was, it did not need to rush. And whatever was coming next would arrive exactly when no one expected it to. That was the worst part. Not knowing whether the next sound you heard would be footsteps or breathing. The mistake people made was believing the silence meant restraint. It did not. It meant preparation. When the figure returned, it was not announced by chaos. It arrived quietly, folded into routine. A car slowing down at the right moment, a light cutting through darkness at a familiar height, a voice offering help in a way that felt almost ordinary. That was how trust slipped in. Not forced, invited. Those who survived later struggled with the same thought. Not what happened, but how easily the moment began. How normal it felt right up until it didn't. How the brain resisted panic, even when the body already knew. Investigators widened their search. Help arrived from outside the island. Experienced minds, fresh eyes. They brought structure, profiles, and procedures. They brought confidence that something this persistent could be contained if enough pressure was applied. Pressure did not work the way they hoped. Thousands were questioned, doors opened, drawers were searched. Men lined up and gave what was asked of them. Some refused. That fact was noted and then inexplicably set aside. There were always more urgent leads, louder suspects, easier explanations. The figure continued moving between gaps. Night watches formed. Neighbors walked in pairs. People learned to recognize each other's shadows. For a while it seemed to help. Then the threat adapted again. Younger, smaller, easier to frighten into silence. Parents did not sleep after that. They listened to rooms that were too quiet, to breathing that could stop at any moment without warning. Some sat on the edge of beds until morning, afraid that if they lay down, they would miss the sound that mattered. What unnerved officers most were the claims. The figure spoke of things that had not been proven, spoke of having crossed a line others only threatened, spoke as if violence was not an act, but a skill measured in time. No evidence surfaced, no bodies tied directly to him, just words dropped deliberately, like seeds meant to rot in the listener's mind. Then, just as suddenly as before, it stopped. Weeks passed, then months, then longer. Enough time for doubt to creep in. Enough time for people to tell themselves the island had outlasted whatever haunted it. Enough time for children to be allowed outside again, though never unwatched. Police files thickened. Theories hardened. Careers stretched thin around a case that refused to close. Some believed the figure had died. Others believed he had moved on. A few believed the worst option, that he was still there, watching how relief changed behavior, measuring how long it took before habits returned, before windows were left open again, before trust crept back into voices. The next contact proved that silence had never meant surrender. It meant anticipation, and somewhere someone was enjoying the wait. The arrest did not feel heroic. There was no dramatic chase remembered the same way by everyone. No moment the island later agreed on as the turning point. It happened the way accidents do. Fast, unplanned, almost careless. A car moved too quickly through a place where speed stood out. 2 officers followed without expectation. The driver panicked. Choices collapsed into instinct. Metal met metal. A body ran and did not run fast enough. Only later, under steady lights and slowed breathing, did details begin to matter. The coat smelled wrong. Not dirty, not chemical. Something closed in, something worn into fabric over time, the kind of smell you notice only after the adrenaline fades, the kind you never forget once you place it. Inside the pockets were objects that did not belong together. Items meant for concealment, for control, for becoming someone else. When the mask was removed from where it had been hidden, the room changed. Officers did not say much after that. They did not need to. The man did not confess. He did not deny anything either. When asked what he was doing, he answered calmly. When pressed about the disguise, he said nothing. When told they believed he was responsible for years of harm, he looked at them with something close to curiosity. Prove it. The search of his living space took hours, then longer. A room inside a room. Walls that remembered things their owner never intended to forget. Photographs not taken for nostalgia. Clothing chosen for repetition. Objects arranged with intention, not chaos. This was not improvisation. This was ritual. The realization settled slowly. The figure people feared was not some passing shadow. He had eaten meals next to them, attended gatherings, fixed things, smiled when expected, helped when asked. He lived close enough to hear sirens respond to his own work. That was what broke people. Not the cruelty, not even the duration, the normality. At trial, the island listened as pieces were laid out carefully. The planning, the deception, the deliberate misdirection, the false accents, the objects meant to confuse, the refusal years earlier to give something as simple as fingerprints, dismissed at the time as inconsequential. No one spoke when that detail surfaced. Guilt was declared. A sentence was given. A number of years that sounded large until people did the quiet math. Some felt relief. Others felt hollow. Justice felt technical, incomplete. Time passed again. The man aged behind walls. He behaved well. He followed rules. He became, on paper, manageable. When he was released early, the island reacted the way a body does to a returning illness, with rejection. He did not stay. Years later, when death finally came for him, it did not feel like an ending, more like a door closing somewhere far away, leaving behind a room that still smelled wrong. Because questions remained. About those who were never identified. About stories that surfaced too late. About places that were searched only after memory had faded. About whether the worst thing he did was already known, or simply the only part that could be proven. There is an unsolved death still whispered about. A woman last seen waiting. A ride she never finished. A morning that answered nothing. Officially unconnected. Unofficially impossible to ignore. And that is where the story refuses to settle. Because if fear taught the island anything, it was this. The most disturbing monsters do not announce themselves. They wait. They blend. And sometimes, even when they are caught, they leave behind the uncomfortable sense that they were never truly finished with you at all.